Invidious prosecution and disproportionate punishment. So some of the ideas that I had looking at some of the cases that I've seen are criminalization of same-sex sexual activity and a track record of enforcement. So if if the death penalty exists in the country but it's never been used, it's difficult to show a claim of persecution based on that, because if it's not going to be used, then it doesn't actually show that a person knows that they're going to be persecuted in the future. It sounds pretty harsh, but for instance, one of the cases that we're dealing with now that I'll mention later in the UK is a guy from Tanzania, and the criminalization there includes a 14 to 18-year sentence, hard labor, and that sort of thing. And persecution, we didn't really get to the persecution issue in that case, which I'll explain as well. But the border agency just summarily dismissed it as something that was never going to translate into persecution, because it was never really used. It was like people weren't actually put into hard labor and abused in these situations. But a track record of enforcement of some punishment that's disproportionate and brutal, so a track record of death, the death penalty could potentially be reason for proving persecution. Severe punishment linked to pretextual prosecution based on sexuality. And that's something like, a very violent punishment for a crime that actually doesn't deserve it, but there's a pretext that you've been given that crime, given that punishment because of your sexuality. Would also be a way to try to go for persecution based on prosecution. On the other side, mere existence of criminal laws prohibiting same-sex sexual activity does not alone constitute persecution. The next is coercive medical treatment. This is also extremely case-specific, and medical treatment is something that the LGBTI community faces on a regular basis, and it's difficult to parse out what counts as persecution or not. The Ninth Circuit has ruled that forcible institutionalization can count as persecution in certain circumstances, and in this case, the woman applying for asylum was given forcible drug injections and I think electroshock therapy as well. So basically the whole left side of the whole left column, and was awarded asylum on the basis of persecution by the state. But other types of medical treatment might not raise the level of persecution. So the lack of adequate medical treatment, for instance, for HIV. In Europe, this was a big deal. In the UK specifically, about 10 years ago, where there was a case where a woman was in detention, immigration detention. She'd been receiving some medicine while in the UK for treatment for her HIV. And the medicine basically made her body react in such a way that it became dependent on the medicine. And then the question was, can we send her back to Uganda? She's from Uganda. Having put her in a position where her body's now dependent on her drug therapy. And in terms of persecution, the answer was no, because she couldn't prove that it wasn't persecution, because they wouldn't see, the court did not see that as an issue that fell under the state's willful or unwilling non-protection of her by some non-state actor, in this case, disease. And the other question was whether they send her back because they know she's going to face inhumane treatment under a different thing, under the European Convention on Human Rights. And the answer is also no, because they argued that she had a terminal disease and she would pass away anyway. So this is the type of discourse that the term is dealing with. And a lot of the pushback politically was, oh, okay, obviously it's very arbitrary what we call persecution and what we don't call persecution, and it's just a matter of what the politics are like, because if we let one person in because she doesn't get adequate medical treatment, we have to let everyone in. But the other side of that argument is that she was already in the country receiving medicine, and it's partly because of the UK that she was in that position. So it's very, very difficult test. In the UK, I think the test is higher than than it would be in the US, but there I'm not sure. Another thing that I put is phallometric testing, or vaginal photophlesmography. And that's something that Neil wrote a report on, and it's basically the testing of the determination of sexual orientation. And this was happening in the Czech Republic, so in the EU, there was a question of whether or not the Czech Republic should be physically examining people to figure out whether they're gay or lesbian by showing them pornography and hooking them up to some device. And that's seen as violating the European Convention of Human Rights. It's not seen as persecution in and of itself, although it's seen as inhumane and degrading treatment. But that's the type of difference. So there'd be a different reason for these to remain there, which is why I put it in the right column, even though it seems clear that that's a human rights violation.